Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is episode 653. I'm Seth Martin, your host. Thank you for joining me this evening. Glad you're here, and always happy you're listening. Today, what I wanted to do, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but have you ever just thought that everything you know might be wrong? Everything that you think you know might be wrong. And this is something I thought about years ago when I used to get into watching Milton Friedman videos, and Milton Friedman had this saying. He would say, "It's not what you know, what you don't know is the problem." He said, "It's what you think you know that just ain't so." And this always stood with me because, you know, I don't know, something about this generation that we have today, in my generation, this in-between space. I think I'm more like the generation of today than I am my current generation. Like, I still have a lot of friends and family members and people in my circle that are my age that think that everything they know is correct. Like, there's no reason to question anything. And I think that's entirely wrong. And I just thought it was maybe an important time to bring this up. You know, we've got this conflict going on with Iran that could end terribly bad. I mean, it could just be way worse than anybody realizes at this point. In fact, let me just say, I'm not going to say the name of my company, but I just got some news today that we provide computers to customers because the computers have to be upgraded every so many years, like 5 years, in the products that I sell. And we're being told that starting like May 18th, the PCs that we provide, and we have to supply them because there's some software that runs on them. It's pretty critical. And so it's not just us marking these up. This is our supplier basically cannot get PCs enough. And so what's happening is, and we've talked about this, the global supply of helium has been impacted, okay? And we're being notified that we're going to have a 40 to 50% price increase on these computers. And now, to do this work, it's already really expensive. I mean, customers are paying $500,000, $1 million, things like that. These are big numbers. And so for this to be 40 or 50% more, this is going to be very difficult, okay? Customers are just not going to probably spend this money. And, you know, this is just one example of how this thing is impacting the global economy. And all of my competitors are probably experiencing the same thing. They maybe don't know it yet, or they haven't been told yet, but it's coming. And, you know, we listened to Lynn Alden, I don't know, a few weeks ago, talk about, she used the example of, you know, there's a little sensor in your airbag, and that sensor, you know, comes through Malaysia or someplace, and you can't get it, and, you know, the entire car cannot be sold because of this one sensor, you know. And there's just like 1,000 things like that. And here's another example of, you know, this global helium supply is impacting the world's ability to make chips that go in computers, that go in your iPhone, that go in your everything, your car. Chips are in everything now. The microprocessors have become ubiquitous in our lives. And this is going to radically change the global economy. Now, some people might say, well, yeah, maybe for the better. Maybe we'll start manufacturing more here in the U.S. But that could take years. And meanwhile, what's your company going to do? Is it going to keep you on staff until we can reconfigure all that? Probably not. You'll probably get laid off. You'll probably not have a job, and you're going to have to scramble to figure out how to put food on your table and pay your bills. And I just don't, again, we stressed this on the last couple of shows. I don't think people fully understand how tightly integrated the world is. It's just not like it was in World War II. People think, oh, well, it couldn't be as bad as World War II. No, I mean, I agree. World War II was maybe the single worst thing that's ever happened in the world. I mean, Dave Smith mentions that later when we play a clip here. But in terms of you just don't realize how much our world has changed since then, and how much of what we get comes from other places. Even if it's not everything that we get, it's like some component, some seemingly unimportant component comes from some place that nobody's even heard of, maybe, and from a company that nobody's ever heard of. Sure, we're talking about companies like Dell, and we're talking about companies like, Ford and GM and these major corporations, but there are thousands and thousands of smaller companies that are positioned in the middle of these supply chains, and they just don't have the resources to go redesign parts and stuff at the snap of a finger. And so there's just a lot of challenges with, launching this conflict in Iran and disrupting this very, very critical part of the world where a lot of goods and services are traded. And so to me, this kind of comes under the category of, it's not what you don't know, it's what you think you know that just ain't so. And there's a lot of people on TV, a lot of people on programs like this program speculating about how this is all going to work out. And really at the center of their thinking is how great our military is, or how powerful we are as a country. And we've talked about, some of the problems with that is that, yes, economically we're very powerful, but we're also maybe not as resilient as other countries, and we maybe are not as cohesive. And these things are often overlooked. And so I thought this conversation between Tom Woods and Dave Smith, by the way, two of my most favorite people. You should go listen to their shows. The Tom Woods Show, it's on any podcatcher. You can watch it on YouTube. And also Dave Smith's show, Part of the Problem, and he's on there with a guy named Robbie Bernstein. These shows are excellent. The analysis is excellent. The conversations are excellent. Tom Woods, his show, they have a lot of guests, and he interviews a lot of people, and he is kind of a popular person, and so he has access to a lot of people. And then Dave Smith sometimes interviews people, but he's more into debating other people about making good arguments and trying to win arguments. And then he also does a lot of political analysis, and I think it's pretty good. And oddly enough, Dave is a comedian, but what I've noticed is some of these comedians, one of the reasons they're, if they have the right political views, they're also very good at articulating things, because they're used to standing up in front of crowds and getting heckled and things like that. So they're actually pretty good. So I would recommend both his shows. It's Dave Smith, Part of the Problem, and the Tom Woods Show. But I'm going to expose you to them a little bit here today, which I don't normally do. I normally kind of expose you to things outside of the circles that I follow, but I just thought it was so good. I mean, it was just a great conversation, and it covers a lot of ground. Like, one of the things it covers is how there's been a big change in the media space, right? Like, you used to be able to have, and we're going to pick on Mark Levin today, and I used to listen to Mark Levin, and I used to like Mark Levin, but he kind of, I mean, when I liked him, it was because he wrote Men in Black, which is a great book, by the way. That's my favorite book that he wrote. It's all about Supreme Court case history and how that's changed the direction of the United States in ways that are not good. And he's written a couple other books. But lately, he's just been this huge shill for Israel. And all these people that are shills for Israel, they're basically running around saying If you have anything negative to say about Israel, you're an anti-Semite and you're just the scourge of the earth or whatever. And they're blaming, this group of people for, hurting the Republican Party and all that stuff. And it's just, the analysis is just all wrong, okay? What's hurting the Republican Party is Donald Trump's willingness to depart from the one that brung him, right? We've talked about that before. There's something that leads to your success. I mean, if Donald Trump were honest, he would look and say, "Why did I get elected?" And if you analyze that, you would find that he got elected because he wanted to close the border. Okay, there's a big problem for a lot of people. They saw this as a big problem. He wanted to release the Epstein files. Another thing that people saw as a big part of the problem in America is that there's this class of people that seem to be able to abuse people with impunity, get away with it. They're multi-billionaires, a lot of them, and so they're currying favor and privilege with the political class in a way that I think a lot of people looked at that and said, that's why I can't get ahead, it's because of these people. And Trump just totally, he just fumbled on that. He just basically said, we're not going to look into that anymore. And then the final nail in the coffin is just this conflict with Iran. And I just don't see how you can make it about anything else. If the Republicans lose the midterm elections, it's not going to be because of, Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly and all these people. It's not going to be because of that. It's going to be because of the three things I just mentioned. A lot of people, Trump was able to cobble together a good coalition of voters. And what happened is a whole bunch of people went over to the Republican side of the fence because of these three things that I'm talking about. You have the Republicans that are always going to vote Republican, right? There's a group of people that are always going to vote Democrat, and there's another group of people that are always going to vote Republican because they're just stuck in this left-right dichotomy, right? But there's a group of people that actually listen for arguments and kind of move over to one side or the other. And so Trump was able to bring a whole bunch of people over to the Republican side of the ticket that otherwise might not be there. And this is how he did it with these three things: the border, the Epstein files, and no new wars. No new wars in the Middle East, especially in the Middle East. Okay. And all three of those things, these are big deals. These were big, election items for people. And he's just thumbed his nose at it. And this is going to be costly for him politically. But getting back to, today's show topic, people like Levin have been Ben Shapiro have been just criticizing the opposition. I guess if you would call it opposition, the people complaining about Trump and the Trump administration, and especially when it comes to Israel and the Israel subject. And the Israel subject is related to the Epstein files, and it's also related to this Iranian conflict. And all they can say is, you're an anti-Semite. They're just yelling into their microphones, calling people as if, the only thing that runs through my brain is, decisions that are either for the Jews or, not for the Jews or something. I mean, I don't think anybody's thinking about the Jews per se. I think what they're doing is they're looking at the government of Israel and they're saying, these guys are leading us and have been leading us in a very, very bad direction. And just anytime you criticize that, you get these rants from the hard right. And we found out, that a lot of them have been paid, especially the ones on social media. The influencers are getting paid per post. Just crazy stuff. I've heard numbers like $7,000 per post. Some of these people were making hundreds of thousands of dollars because they have no principles and they're willing to post things that are pro-Israel, pro-Trump, conflict or whatever, or you big dope. Why are you worried about the Epstein files? That kind of thing. So I thought we would start by just playing a couple of, well, I got one clip I want to play of Mark Levin and the type of things he's saying. And this is from his radio program. He's a little bit more moderated on his TV program, but it's pretty bad there too. But he's really bad on his radio program. And so I thought we'd start with that, and then move outward from there. I've got a bigger point that I want to make on the show today, but we're going to start right there. All right, let's jump into that.
I don't know where this Jew hatred from the Marxists, the Islamists, the neo-Nazis, the grifters, I don't know where they're pulling us and pushing us. What do they want to do with American Jews? What do they want to do? Where are they taking this country? They're destroying it. Carlson, Owens, Kelly, Bannon, it is a time for choosing. You pick the good guys or the bad guys. You pick America or you pick the Third Reich. They're not MAGA. They're not conservative. In fact, they're more Marxist, Islamist, America-hating, Jew-hating thugs than anything else. And let me educate them briefly. The Babylonians couldn't kill the Jews. The Persians couldn't kill the Jews. The Romans couldn't kill the Jews. Hitler couldn't kill the Jews, and by this I mean eliminate them. You think your puny little asses are going to be able to do it?
All right. So you can see this is from Tucker Carlson's show. But, he's talking about killing Jews, and I don't know. I've listened to a number of these people talking. I follow a lot of these people talking. I've listened a little bit to Megyn Kelly. I've listened to Candace Owens. I've listened to Tucker Carlson. I don't hear anybody talking about killing the Jews. Now, maybe what he's talking about is Iran wants to kill the Jews, or Hezbollah wants to kill the Jews, or Hamas wants to kill the Jews. And, I don't doubt that, actually. But, this is probably up for debate, but I think what we've shown, or what history has shown over this brief quarter of a century that we've gone through here with the war on terror and things like that, is there is such a thing as blowback. Okay, there is such a thing as, if you leave somebody alone, okay, they're not inclined to just aggress against you. Okay, but by the same token, if you pick on somebody, it's the bully kind of thing, right? You go to school and the bullies are picking on some kid, and you pick it on some kid, and then the bully one day fights back and knocks out 2 or 3 of the bullies. The picked on kid fights back and knocks out 2 or 3 of the bullies. He's just had all he can take. Well, that's a little bit about, this is kind of my view anyway, this is kind of where a lot of these people are. And Iran has done some things, right? Obviously, they have funded Hamas and Hezbollah and are using proxies. But who else uses proxies? Are we not using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia? This is just how things are done. And they're done that way because, in our case, I think we have kind of an irrational view of Russia. And you could have a situation where Israel has an irrational view of Iran because of these proxies, right? I don't know. These are very complicated kind of things, but at the same time, it's almost like there's hey, we think they're going to kill us, so we got to kill them first. And that's a little bit crazy. I was listening to somebody the other day, maybe it was Jeffrey Sachs, and he was saying that, Iran hasn't attacked anybody. Okay? This would be the argument we would use. If somebody said, well, you're attacking Russia via your proxy in Ukraine. But if you if we were arguing against that as a country, the United States, we would say, we haven't attacked anybody in however long, right? Iran hasn't attacked anybody since like 1790 or something like that. And yes, they are not happy about the way the Palestinians are being treated. And so they're taking that out on Israel. But then you look at the way Israel's treating the Palestinians, and I don't think there's any other way to look at that and say, and kind of agree with Iran. I mean, I know that sounds kind of hyperbolic, but look at all the people. I mean, we're always talking about, oh, they killed their own citizens, or, I mean, technically, Israel, the Palestinians are citizens of Israel, technically. Okay? Certainly the ones in the West Bank are, okay? I mean, there's just a fact. I mean, maybe they're not citizens in the sense that you and I are a citizen, but they don't have their own country and they're living within the state of Israel. And so what does it mean when you kill 80,000 of your own people? I mean, we tried to go overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria because allegedly he killed a bunch of people with gas or whatever. And then we were quick to go say all these negative things about Iran because allegedly they killed, well, I don't know what the true numbers are on there. I don't think anybody knows, but I don't think it's 32,000. I think it's probably closer to 6,000 or 7,000. But notice how quick we were to use that as a predicate for war. I just think I think people have picked their side. What I see anyway is it seems to me that people have picked a side and then they develop their arguments to defend their side. It's very much like the Republicans and Democrats. You decide you're going to be a Democrat and then you defend your side. Or I decide I'm going to be a Republican and then I defend my side. I think the challenge with all this is nobody's really being objective about this. And I think if you objectively, look at, there's two things. One, the way Israel behaves in the region, okay? And then also their ability to influence our government. Both of those things, if you were objective about them, you would have to say that, yes, Israel has some influence over the U.S. government, for sure. And no, I don't think Israel is treating its neighbors the way, I would want to be treated if I was a neighbor of somebody, okay? I mean, I used this example the other day. I mean, the lady that lives across the street from me, she's a Democrat and we don't agree on a lot of things. I'm not over there like blowing her house up or slashing the tires on her car, and she's not doing the same to me. You can live together and have disagreement, okay? But then still recognize that the other person is a human being. And I think that is just not happening at all in any of these situations. Both sides are looking at each other like they're animals, and they're perfectly justified in, killing them. And I just think that's wrong, and it's leading to really bad outcomes. It can get to a situation where it impacts all of us. Literally all of us. I mean, if this goes on for a long time, for example, you're going to have millions and millions of people starving to death. Okay? I mean, just flat out starving. Without fertilizer and without being able to move food around to places that don't have food, you got a big problem here. And so now all of a sudden, a whole bunch more people are going to be roped into this I don't want to say little dispute, this dispute. And wouldn't it be better if we just kept our money out of it, just like if we kept our money out of Ukraine, and let Russia and Ukraine figure it out? They're neighbors. They have to figure it out. Just like we have to figure things out with Mexico and Canada. We're not going to go solicit Germany for funds, or let's say that Canada solicited funds from Germany to fight a proxy war against the United States. I mean, how's that going to resolve anything? So anyway, so we played this clip from Mark Levin, and I talked a little too long and got off topic, but let's jump to this next clip. This clip is of Dave Smith kind of talking about how Mark Levin's just crashing out.
Levin is literally like it's almost like feels like he's having an episode. Like he is like, I know people use the term a lot, but he is crashing out on Twitter. Just you're watching like an 80-year-old man tweeting like these nasty things, these tirades. And, there is something, these people seem like very disturbed people. That's what that's how it appears. But they're in, the broader picture here, the role that they're playing is that they're like the attack dogs of all the dissidents. So their job is to go out and like smear anybody who dare criticize this thing. And, with the Candace Owens stuff, it's like they try to make it about her criticism of Erica Kirk, or that she's like putting together conspiracies and she's way out over her skis and she's making these claims, but she can't back it up. But the thing is that for people who have a memory more than 15 minutes ago, we all know you were already coming at her like this way before she ever talked about Erica Kirk or any of this. It's so clearly, no, the issue was that she turned on support of Israel. That was the issue. That's what she got fired from the Daily Wire for. That's what they all decided she's a huge anti-Semite for, opposing Israel's destruction of Gaza. And so anyway, I think you kind of recognize it. Like that's what the game is here. That's the role that these people serve, is to attempt to character assassinate anybody who, but almost and me and you have kind of been watching this dynamic together since our friendship. We've watched like it used to be a world where that worked. I mean, that was like when I found you and the whole, whatever you want to call it, the whole Ron Paulian libertarian camp. They were a movement that had essentially been character assassinated and driven out of polite society. Like we hung out in Auburn at the Mises Institute because like this is the only place that'll have us. I don't know, like there's nowhere else. We're not invited to any of the other things. And guys, like it was like that was the world, but that doesn't work anymore because of the new decentralized, media environment. And so now it's almost like they had to level up the character. Like the only tool that they knew that worked is character assassination. So then as it stopped working, they would just be like, well, we have to go even crazier over the top with our assessment of.
Yeah. I don't think it can be overstated. I don't know if people are really paying attention to this or not, but the corporate media environment has just torpedoed. And now some of this is demographic. Okay. Young people, I would say people below the age of 40, 35 or 40, they're not watching Fox News or CNN. Most of them can't afford cable. They're struggling to afford their cars and their rent. And so they're getting their news from YouTube and things like that. And you may like it, you may not like it. It doesn't really matter. The point is, and this is, by the way, this is, I believe, one of the reasons Charlie Kirk was killed, is he had a huge, you can believe if you want, that this, furry guy or whatever, Tyler Robinson, did it. I'm not saying he wasn't involved, but he's clearly a patsy. This was much more sophisticated hit on Charlie Kirk. I think eventually it's probably going to come out just because the case that they have against Tyler Robinson's not going to stick. But the point is, Charlie Kirk had power, a lot of power, political power on the right, okay? And he was changing his position on Israel, okay? He was going from being completely in the tank on Israel to going, man, I don't know what these guys are doing over there in Israel. This looks pretty bad. I think I'm going to have to quit saying positive things about Israel. And of course they knew it. They knew this was coming. And notice he was killed at the very first event. That's not a coincidence. They had to do it before he went on his tour and started getting all this on videotape, right? And there was just too much risk that he was going to move too many people in the Republican Party away from Israel. That's the story. That's the story I see. I don't see, first of all, like the first few days after Charlie Kirk's assassination, I'd say, man, can you believe that Charlie Kirk? And people would say to me things like, well, that's what he gets for being so hateful. Dude, I didn't follow Charlie Kirk, but I did go watch a bunch of his videos. I didn't see one hateful thing come out of the guy's mouth ever. So this was just a narrative that they created. And I think if he had been allowed to turn against Israel publicly and bring all that Turning Point USA support against the right, it just would have been devastating to the right. And it still might be, it's still probably going to be. Turning Point USA has changed in a way that I think some of the people are not liking. So it may be all for naught anyway. But yeah, just the media apparatus, once, you know, let's say Elon Musk bought Twitter and people could get what they felt like was more truthful information on Twitter and on YouTube, and the whole COVID regime was gone and everything, man, the corporate media just went down, down, down. And so Mark Levin is talking to maybe a few 100,000 people, where, you know, Tucker Carlson is talking to 80 million. And Joe Rogan is talking to 30 million people. And even these guys you see on the screen, they're talking to millions of people. And so there's just too many of those. Megyn Kelly's talking to millions of people. All these people left Fox News, Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, and they're talking to 20, 30, in Tucker Carlson's case, thousands more people, thousands times more people than he was on Fox, okay? And so this is the new world. And people like Mark Levin, they think in order to combat it, you just become the bully. You know, you just say horrible things about it and tell people it's the reason this is happening, it's the reason that's happening, and don't pay attention to what's going on over here, you know, pay attention to what I'm saying or whatever. And it's probably not going to work. And it is what it is, but it doesn't seem to be working. Let's listen to another clip of Mark Levin here, and then we'll come back to Dave and Tom.
And I'm supposed to, what? Shed crocodile tears for what's going to happen to these people? I'm not. Maybe I'm the only one who will voice it, but I'm not. Israel has every right to throw every damn thing it has at barbarians. And if there are innocent people, quote-unquote civilians, who are killed, then maybe they ought to organize to take out the government they elected. Tapper and the others are saying there's 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. They're not all terrorists. They don't all believe in Hamas. They really have no choice. Let me ask you a question. Is that how we treated the German people when we were fighting the Third Reich? Well, they're not all Nazis. You got to fight to win and survive. You can't sit there and figure all that stuff out. Oh, but don't hurt the civilians. Look, we have to defend ourselves. The Israelis have to defend ourselves. The free world has to defend itself. And if there's collateral damage, well, that's too bad.
Okay. The part that really stood out for me on this, that really bothers me, is like, if, you know, the whole, well, if the people aren't really this way, then they should organize to change their government or whatever. It's like, I mean, when I heard that, I thought to myself, oh my God, are you so tone deaf? Just think about this. A majority of Americans right now, a pretty high majority, like more than 60%, do not want this conflict to proceed with Iran. That's a majority, by the way. So why is our government doing it? So the idea that, oh, the people can just organize and get control of their government. I mean, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. First of all, the Iranian people, they don't have a right to bear arms. They don't have guns. It's just like what happened here on January 6th. People were perceived to, nobody had any guns at January 6th, but that was still called an insurrection. What is an insurrection? Isn't an insurrection like if you're trying to overthrow the government? Is that really what happened on January 6th? Did we see a group of people trying to overthrow the government? Or was that just a riot? And we still don't even know. I mean, we know a little bit more about January 6th. We know there was like 170 government officials there, like FBI people there now. So was it really an organic riot or an insurrection? Or were there people agitating and all that stuff? This whole idea, this is all wrapped up in, by the way, this is wrapped up in the idea that, we're a government of, for, and by the people. As if the people really could get together and just decide, oh, we don't want war at Iran. I mean, it's laughable. That is absolutely laughable. People have been calling for the end of these wars. Donald Trump was elected on this, okay? For the end of the wars in the Middle East. In fact, there have people have gone back and did studies on this. Every single candidate for the last 30 years that's been elected president has always been the anti-war candidate. It's been the candidate that wants to get along with other people in the world, other governments in the world, and use diplomacy to negotiate and work with people. Every single president that has won has taken that position in the last 30 years. That's what the people want. But isn't it interesting that we have just the opposite? We have total war for the last 30 years. So this whole idea that, the Iranian people should overthrow the regime if they don't like, bombs dropping on them. Oh, and Hamas, they should overthrow the Palestinian militants, the Hamas militants. I'm sorry, Palestinians should overthrow the Hamas militants if they don't want they don't want the Gaza Strip. This is a lack of understanding of what governments are. Just think of government as the biggest, baddest gang in the neighborhood, okay? The reality is in the Middle East, between Israel and the Palestinians, is the meaner, more powerful, better equipped, more money, better organized gang in the Middle East is Israel. Okay? They got their uncle over here across the pond that's funding them, but it's still a government, which is a gang, and they do gangster shit. Hey, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. And if you don't take it, then I'm going to drop, 1 million tons of weaponry on you or whatever. This is the proper way to think about this. It's not, hey, let's get control of our government and impose the will of the people. This is a fantasy. It's like Professor Zhang talks about. These governments are a construct. They're not real. They're just a collection of interest, people that want certain things, and they have money and power, and they get it. They don't care what the people think. They're not listening to the people. That's ridiculous. And of course, the sooner we come to that realization and understand that, the sooner we can insist on a government one way or the other. I mean, we just need like a critical mass of people. The problem right now is, you got the Republican, you got the Democrat, and you got this little bit in the middle. But, the Republicans and the Democrats both think they can drive the bus. That's the problem with our system is the Democrats think they can drive the bus better, and the Republicans think they can drive the bus better. And then there's these people in the middle that don't want anybody really driving the bus. We want the free market. We want honest money. Okay. We don't want people to have privilege in the government. We don't want the government to run things. Okay. But the problem is there's not enough of us. If there were enough of us, we could get rid of all this craziness. But it's just right now we're stuck, and it could be ultimately our undoing. I mean, this Iran thing I think is way worse than most people think, and I'm sure we're going to find out soon enough. All right, let's jump into this. We got to go back to Iran, Levin crashing out, and let Dave finish saying what he was saying.
All those guys. And even back then, if you remember, as I'm sure you do well, there was, dude, unpatriotic was like, ooh, that burns. Like that was like, to call Pat Buchanan or Lou Rockwell unpatriotic, like those are like serious, very personally conservative men who grew up in a time where like, yo, to call someone unpatriotic was like a real. Now, Pat Buchanan, I remember, as much as I love him, I always remember thinking this was so weird, at least to me in my, New York City, Jewish, raised by a single mother sensibilities. Remember, he was furious that Obama took his jacket off in the Oval Office. And there was like a picture of Barack Obama just in a shirt and tie.
Yeah, that is such an old school critique.
Oh, Pat Buchanan was furious about that. And I remember being like, Pat, dude, like I just finished reading one of his books. It's like one of the greatest books I've ever read. I'm like, yo, there's so many things here to criticize. Like, who can? But that's the type of men they were. Like Lou Rockwell is a guy like that. Like a guy who cared about like manners and chivalry and like these old kind of bourgeois norms. And so calling him unpatriotic was like a real low blow. But now that just is, Mark Levin isn't saying, I think Tom Woods and Dave Smith are unpatriotic. He's like, you Islamo-Nazi scum or, whatever. Like it's just this unhinged rant. And so I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with all of this, but it's interesting to watch them all crashing out, watching, like it was never, David Frum never would have been so undignified in the way he was smearing people. You know what I mean? Like, even though he was doing the same thing, he was playing the same role, but the wheels have just like come off of this thing now. And it's a very strange time to be.
Yeah, I agree. The wheels have come off and there's no, I mean, the criticisms are ad hominem type criticisms. They're not based in, argument or anything like that. It's almost like watching mud wrestling or something. It's crazy. And that's the political environment that we're living in right now. All right, let's go to the next clip. This is one of the points that I wanted to make is that I said in the beginning, what if I'm wrong? What if the way I've been thinking about this is all wrong? That kind of thing. They kind of talk about this in the context of history and revisionism. And I just thought it was like a really important point. And, we've talked about this before, like with the public school system, maybe what you learned is not the truth, and they kind of touch on that. I thought that was really good.
When we think about the 21st century, imagine sitting in a classroom in 2026 and your textbook, contrary to the experience, my textbook was always, 20 years old, so we never had any of the recent stuff. But let's imagine the textbook goes through 2026. Now, the fact that you and I are unhappy with Trump at the moment clearly does not mean we're on the left. That's for darn sure.
Yeah.
If I were to read that textbook in 2026, it would be completely wrong about COVID and Fauci. It would be completely wrong about Ukraine. It would be completely wrong about 2008 and the financial crisis. And that's not even going back 20 years. So, and that's just three major things. Like we know for a fact it would teach the exact opposite of the truth of that. Meanwhile, suppose Laura Loomer managed to string two sentences together and write an American history textbook. That would also be all wrong. And it would be full of all kinds of hero worship and absurdities. So the point is, if we know for a fact that the history of the past 20 years would be all wrong, why is the history of the 20th century exempt from exactly the same forces? Why is that?
And didn't
we
even
don't have to look at that. And that because that was all written at a time when there's no independent media to check it.
Right. That was my point that I was going to make. And written at a time where the only voice in the room was the establishment, Right. And look, like we could all recognize on some level that forget even like taking the example of World War II because people get so emotionally charged, but let's just say there had been a different result in World War I, which was quite possible. I mean, through years of World War I, it was very close. I mean, before the Americans joined, it was like essentially a stalemate. And let's just say there had been a different result in that. Let's say Germany had won World War I. Does anybody think that the accepted establishment history would be the same? No, it'd be a completely different story that would be told. And does anybody believe that story would be 100% accurate? Like, no, of course, we all know that they would have skewed the story in their favor and told it from their perspective. And Okay, so what are you saying? It's like, because our side won, we're just angels on this side? Like, not even saying World War II, where people try, yes, Hitler was really a monster, and it's really easy to paint him as a monster. But it's really hard to paint Joseph Stalin and FDR and Winston Churchill as angels. Like, that part's really tough. And so the only argument we're making is like, yes, they would have probably lied if they had won, but I'm not so sure that the angels on our side were completely honest about the whole thing either. I'm not saying that the presidents wrote the history books, but it does all kind of get filtered through that same establishment lens. And you look at something like, you know, the reaction to Darryl Cooper's comments on Tucker from last year,
embarrassing.
But it's revealing. I mean, it's like, whoa. Yeah, there is a real, you know, Tucker Carlson had a line once where he said, he was talking about things you're not allowed to say. And he was like, it's like when a wound is infected and you just touch it and you like immediately recoil. Like there's something like, oh, there's an infection here. What's going on? And the basic thing, and people,
all right, this whole discussion about Darryl Cooper is a little bit of inside baseball, but yeah, you know, I wonder if people ever think about that. Like, what if Germany had won? Obviously, there would be some historical understanding of the war from our perspective. But let's say they won. And we're over here thinking, you know, your actions are kind of colored by the way you think, right? So if you're thinking you were the victim in the war or somebody, you know, I think it's easy to see that I think, but let's back up. Maybe Tom Wood's example is the best because he says, you know, we've lived through the first quarter of this century, right? And we had the .com bubble, we had the start of the Iraq War and invasion of Afghanistan, 9/11. We've had the financial crisis, we had COVID, and now we've got this war going on with Iran, and we know, for example, for sure that the story around the financial crisis is just bullshit, okay? We know that we were lied into the Iraq War. You know, what's the official history going to look like? I don't know, but it's probably not going to reflect those things, right? COVID. I mean, the narrative around COVID is going to be that the wise, you know, leaders of America saved everybody in America because we responded so quickly and did Operation Warp Speed, and we quickly locked down to stop the spread and all this kind of stuff. And all that is just bullshit. It's all just not even true, right? But it's probably what's going to end up in the history books. And so if you know that, or if you believe that, it's not that much of a leap to say, well, maybe there were some things about World War II that aren't really true, that are more in the propaganda space. Because, you know, Churchill did this and Roosevelt did that. And if you look at this Iranian situation, okay? I mean, look at before the bombs started to drop, the Straits of Hormuz were open. We had forward operating bases in the Middle East that weren't being molested at all, okay? We had, what else did we have? Well, let's just say those things, okay? And our only thing, the reason we started all this is because of some fear, or we told ourselves basically that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. Now, the IAEA says no, that's not true. The Director of National Intelligence of the United States of America said no, that's not true. But we went to dropping bombs anyway, okay? So if we end up with a situation where let's say we sign a peace deal tomorrow, okay? But the Strait of Hormuz is closed. We have to move all of our troops out of the Middle East. The GCC suffers dramatically because of all that. And maybe Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. Maybe they agree to not get a nuclear weapon. They are in the non-proliferation treaty. Okay, so they're already kind of saying we're not going to get a nuclear weapon, but they're going to get to uh, have uranium up to 3.5% for a private and like a commercial power program, okay? Which we were saying that wasn't even legit. So all these things, if you compare what we had on day one to what is likely to be settled peace agreement on day whatever, I mean, it was a loss for us. So it just, and I'm sure the history books will probably tell a different story. But if that's the case, why can't we look at the history of World War II and say, Churchill had several off ramps. Why didn't he take them? We could have done this, or we could have done that. What's wrong with second guessing all that to try to learn from it? Isn't that the point of history, is to try to learn from it? I mean, I think that's certainly what Daryl Cooper is saying. But man, no, you're just a Nazi if you start talking about this kind of stuff. I mean, there's no taking on or grappling with any of the things that these people are saying. It's just Nazi. You're a Nazi. You're a Hitler lover or whatever. And these are just not productive, and it makes it really difficult to learn from history, which is the whole point of writing history books in the first place. So you can put them in schools and teach people what happened. But, the victors always write the history, right? And of course they're going to make themselves look like the greatest people in the world, and the greatest diplomats with the most brilliant strategy and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know. To me, there's a little too much of that. There needs to be more of, what if everything I know is wrong? That would be a healthier way to look at the world. Or at least going forward, hey, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I need to take a step back from this and see if there's something here that I can learn from this or whatever. I just think there needs to be more humility. I've said this before, and I think this is kind of what the whole point is of talking about this.
There's probably one group of people who are well-meaning and honest intentioned who do get, oh, so is there a dark thing that you're trying to say in there? Like, are you somehow trying to say that like Hitler was really good or something like that, right? Like there might be honest people who wonder about that, but there's a whole other group of people who insist that that's all you could be saying.
Right.
And that's why this must be shut down, when really I think what a lot of people kind of, you look at something like World War II, it's objectively like the worst thing that ever happened. But, okay, I don't know, maybe you could come up with some Genghis Khan attack or something that like rivals it or something. But like, it's the biggest bloodbath in human history. It destroyed all of Europe. It's like the worst thing you could imagine. Just like innocent civilians, not military, women and children being slaughtered by the tens of millions. Like the scale of the horror is like too much to even process. And then yet we're supposed to look back at that and go, and that was perfect. We did it right. You can't go, and obviously the other side didn't do it right either. There were, you know what I mean? Like there were off ramps that they could have pursued. Obviously, I don't think anyone's denying that. My God, if you wanted to avoid the war, how much guilt does Hitler have on his hands? I mean, a ton. He humiliated Chamberlain in front of the world, and like, okay, but are you telling me like you get to that result and your takeaway is that there's nothing we should look in the mirror about? There's nothing we should learn. There's no question about, did we handle it the right way? Could this have possibly been avoided? And it's amazing. I mean, it's like this is like a marriage that ends. It's not a marriage that ends in divorce. It's like a marriage that ends in the mom or the dad killing the whole family. Like just the worst case scenario. And then you're going to look at that and say, we shouldn't try to question whether this was the best course of action or whether this could have been avoided. And you see in a thing like Daryl, where he really didn't even say anything. Like he didn't say anything that they have to pretend he said something he didn't in order, but you can't even question the thing. It's just people are allergic to that. And
yeah, again, this is a little bit of inside baseball, but just what Daryl Cooper said is that Churchill might have been the actual villain of the war. But just to expound on what Dave said, let's say that, I don't know how many people died in World War II. It was 30 million or something like that. But let's just suppose, just for argument's sake, it was 1 billion people. Okay, so 1 billion people died in something, and what, we're not supposed to look at it and go, God, wouldn't it have been better if only maybe 500 million people died? Or, what could we have done so that only 500 million people died? Or whatever, I mean, that's the only point he's trying to make is, if 30 million people died, wouldn't it have been better if only 10 died, 10 million, or 5, or 1? And so what's wrong with looking at how the war unfolded from that perspective to try to understand where off-ramps could have been taken to avoid the absolute catastrophe that was World War II? And it's the same thing now. One of two things is going to happen here in Iran, okay? Either Trump is going to recognize that he was misled by Israel and he got into this, it was a fool's errand, and he got into this, and he's going to swallow hard. And maybe what he does is he blames Netanyahu, okay? I listened to this guy, I shouldn't have, okay? And it's his fault. It's my fault too, and I apologize, but I should have never listened to this guy. In fact, governments going forward should never listen to this guy, okay? That's one way out, okay? That's an off-ramp, okay? The flip side is we're going to get into this cycle of escalation. So right now, just looking at this objectively, let's say that, 10,000 people total have died. I don't know how many people have died, but let's just suppose 10,000 people have died. Okay, so that if we stop right now, only 10,000 people have died. And many of those people are innocent people. I mean, there's at least 162 schoolgirls that are innocent people that died already, okay? Now, let's say that we get into the cycle of escalation. And let's say it didn't go on for another 10 years. Let's say it goes on for another 2. And, 5 million people died. Are you going to tell me that we can't look back at that and go, man, Trump should have just thrown Netanyahu under the bus, said the whole thing was a mistake, and apologize, and just put it to bed? That wouldn't have been better? Well, it would have been better for, the 2 or 3 million people that died. You see what I'm saying? Or more. Maybe what happens if this escalates to the use of nuclear weapons and 1 billion people die? Are we going to not look back on this and go, we should have never dropped the bomb? Here we are afraid of, somebody using nuclear weapons, and to stop them, we use nuclear weapons. You see the foul, the problem with the way this goes? If you're worried about somebody using nuclear weapons, then you should find out what they want and do some diplomacy. Maybe you don't get to a place where you can agree, but maybe you do, okay? And at least you understand each other better, even if you don't get exactly what you want. It just seems like a better way to go. All right, this next section is kind of similar. They kind of talk about the civil rights movement, and I thought it was good. It's a good example of, something that needs to be needs to have historians need to look at it again. The reason people are talking about this, by the way, is because we're looking at the United States and we're saying, what the hell's wrong? Why are things the way they are? Why does it feel like everything we've done has not turned out for better? It's actually turned out for worse. And what you have to do, if you want to know the answers to those questions, you have to go examine some of these very critical policy shifts in our history. Like if you want to look at immigration and you want to know, well, how did America just become brown over the last 40 years, I mean, way brown, go look at videos of people in the 50s and people walking around in New York City and compare that with videos today, okay? How did that happen? It started with the government. The government did something. It changed something. What did it change? In 1965, they rewrote the immigration law. And things like this chain migration were introduced and so on and so forth. And several decades of that, and you end up with something like what we have today. So you have to be able to go back and look at these things and say, wow, maybe that didn't quite work out the way we thought it would. Let's look to see where we made some mistakes. And if you don't do that, then you can't first, you can't make a course correction. And two, you have no idea what went wrong. You just know that there's chaos in the streets today or whatever. There's whatever the outcome is what it is, but it's like you just don't know. You don't know like what happened. Like what happened? What the hell happened? It's kind of like looking at the debt. How do we get to 39 trillion in debt? There is a story that leads to that answer, right? But if you don't examine it, then you just run around and call people Nazi for blaming other people that we have a debt, $39 trillion debt. Well, it's not productive. You just don't get anywhere with that. All right, let's jump into this civil rights discussion.
But it's not even just World War II. Like, for example, the civil rights movement needs to be looked at again.
Yep.
Sorry, it does. It absolutely does, because it is what we've been presented just on the cusp of the development of the internet was Newt Gingrich telling us that Martin Luther King was a conservative, and we really need to embrace. I mean, it's like none of these people are serious. That's not serious. If you think it is, you don't know any of the material. So,
or even libertarians. How many goofy like Gary Johnson libertarian types would have said, my libertarianism is a Martin Luther King type of libertarianism, and you're like, dude, I mean, what? Like, you're taking one excerpt of one speech and that's what you're defining Martin Luther King-ism as?
Right. So but basically what the neocons are more or less doing with Daryl and other people is even though they call us woke right, that's a laugh. Number one, they're saying, well, there's certain boundaries you can't go beyond, and there's certain topics that we're not going to reopen again. Well, sorry, that sounds like a left-wing scold to me. So that's one thing. There's certain things, if you even investigate them, we automatically assume the worst about you. That's how the woke behave. We automatically assume the worst about you just because of what you're pursuing in history or scholarship. But then also they use the magic word thing. Well, you're an anti-Semite. You're this or you're that. I just saw, just in my social media feed, just at random, I saw somebody sharing something very, very, just something bad that Israel had done in Lebanon. And the first comment was, you seem like an anti-Semite. Like, that's not, nobody believes that. You might as well just knock that off. Nobody believes it. But again, that's how woke people behave. So they're the woke ones. And yet they're also the ones who are telling us, they're the ones who are telling us what we're allowed to say, think, what position we can have, what issues are open to debate. Go screw yourself. And we're going to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think that is almost the essence of this entire, podcast world's attitude. Like, what, we're just going to do it. We're going to talk about this. And, to your point, there's a lot of these real third rail issues, and the civil rights movement and World War II are probably the two biggest ones that really do need re-examining. And to your point, and I guess this is something that people like me and you have been re-examining for a long time, but now it's much broader. There's a much wider audience of Americans who are like thinking about some of these things. And it's amazing how much in some sense, you could argue that anyone who supports the Civil Rights Act of 64 is a leftist. To be a right winger, you kind of have to oppose. I mean, if you think about in kind of basically on paper, I mean, whatever definition of left and right winger you're working with, but if you're for a government intervention that puts at the role of the federal government that it ought to reach into the lives of every individual business, every individual culture and neighborhood, and have this massive centralized enforced policy in the name of racial egalitarianism, of remaking society into a racial egalitarian state. That is leftism, man. Like, no matter how you look at it, it is a leftist idea. Now, listen, that doesn't make it wrong by definition, unless you're people like us, but that is leftism. And so, like, for all of these people who even present themselves as right wingers, you're really not a right winger if you support the 64 Civil Rights Bill. That's just almost by definition. And so that really gives you a little bit of a clue of where the left-right divide is in America. Like the right doesn't exist, essentially, is my point, and hasn't existed for many, many decades. There's no such thing because it was the complete consensus. And this is the way it always would work, is that like the right-wingers would always oppose what the left-wingers were doing. And so if the left-wingers were passing the New Deal, who was the right? The right were the ones who were opposed to the New Deal. And then a new school of right-wingers come in and go, okay, look, we accept the New Deal, but we oppose this great society. And then a new group of right-wingers come in and go, oh, okay, we all accept the great society, but I don't know about Obamacare. And, they're not even running on repealing Obamacare anymore, like this is always how it goes. And the same thing happened with the civil rights movement, where then it just gets buried that there was any principled objection to this at all. But there was at the time. Barry Goldwater was one of the most prominent people. And like he lost the day, he lost the argument, and for understandable reasons. But at this point, you're looking back at this stuff and essentially what? It's just like the permanent revolution. It never stops. The civil rights movement ended up being the perpetual communist revolution in a sense, because even if you look at a Kamala Harris interview for today, she's going to be talking about some type of DEI program, some type of new thing, because after all of this, much like any type of government intervention, after all of this intervention in the name of racial egalitarianism, well, where does that leave things? With high racial tensions, and Black people still are not doing well in this country. So they have all of the problems that they used to have, plus a whole bunch of new ones. I mean, now look, I shouldn't say all of the problems. Some things have gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
There's been technological advances. We're all a lot wealthier than we used to be back then. But by many like basic moral metrics, kind of foundational, how are you doing as a people? And it's not just economics, and libertarians get off on that sometimes. So it's not just like, if I were to just ask, how are you doing, Tom? Like friends on the phone, off the show, how are you doing? The question isn't simply, are you making more money than you made last year? You know what I mean? There's more to life. And sometimes
if I walk down the corridor of almost any of these schools and look around, that has nothing to do with money. It has to do with something. Right. Something's gone wrong here.
Yes. When your family units have been devastated and destroyed, that there's something more profound than money to that. And so like in many senses, the African Americans in America, yes, they were poorer in the 1940s and the 1950s. And yes, they were much more discriminated against in many ways. But they were also less criminal and more family oriented, and I think in many ways doing better. So anyway, the thing has just been it's been a nightmare. It has not made race relations better in this country. They got better in spite of it for years, and it doesn't seem to have done anything for the people it allegedly was supposed to serve. So yeah, I think all of this is ripe for revision.
Man, I cannot agree with that more. That's just a really interesting insight. One of the most interesting things that he said was is he kind of explained how the counter-revolution has been happening. I used to kind of talk about that. I used to kind of talk about there's a counter-revolution. Basically, since before the ink was dry on the Constitution, there's been a group of people kind of doing this counter-revolution thing. And admittedly, it's hard to demonstrate that, right? Because, how would you demonstrate that? Well, I think Dave just did an excellent job in showing that how the left is always trying to push the boundaries of something like the New Deal. And then the right is saying, no, we're not for the New Deal. And they fight it and they fight it and they fight it and they lose. And then 10 years later or 5 years later or whatever, a new group of Republicans come in and they go, yeah, the New Deal's settled law. Okay. But the New Deal just moved us, some degree further away from the original Constitution. And then you go to the civil rights movement and all the laws that were created there in the name of racial egalitarianism. And you just moved, again, further away from the Constitution. Now, could you have achieved something like that without, I think if you just take away the desire for equality, you probably could have had some improvement there without these revolutionary kind of results. But then Obamacare, I mean, that's always been frustrating for me. Is like the Republicans fought so hard against Obamacare, and now you just don't hear anybody say anything about it. They're just like, yeah, that's what we got. We got Obamacare. Nobody's running against it or anything like that. The Republicans aren't trying to change anything. Trump just gave that up in his first term, just didn't do anything. And so this is how the counter-revolution unfolds. And I thought that was a brilliant explanation of it. But then also just I think the point of how are you doing is a very valid point too. I mean, he's right. When you ask your friend, how are you doing? You're not expecting them to go, well, I made 23% more this year, and you're not really expecting that. You're expecting them to say, well, the kids are doing good, and we just got back from vacation, and you're expecting them to tell you about their life. Well, when you look at the results of all this counter-revolutionary political activity over the last century, people aren't doing that much better, other than the technological aspects. Of course, we've improved our standard of living, no thanks to government, okay, by making better cars and cell phones and communications and just all that kind of stuff is better. But that doesn't have anything to do with the government. That happened in spite of what the government was doing. The government was constantly putting bricks in our backpack, and people just kept innovating their way out of it. But I think we're getting to a point where, we have to begin to say, maybe everything I think about the world is not right. Like there's something is wrong, right? I think that's where you have to end up, because at some point, Republican and Democrat just doesn't explain, the difficulty. Like another good example is just how every generation did better than the previous generation. Well, that trend has changed permanently. I mean, the next generation is not doing better than the previous generation anymore. That maybe my generation was maybe the last to experience that. So what's causing that trend change, right? There's got to be something. You got to be thinking about, these major counter-revolutionary kind of trends, these past events. And if you can't go back and talk about them, then how do you ever escape any of this? That's kind of the point they're getting to. And for me, I think for me it was around 2000 where when we had the .com crash, I was like, because I lost some money, and I'm thinking to myself, what if this is all wrong? Like what if there's something, and that led me to honest money and other things, and but I literally said that, like what if people telling me that, oh, just keep putting your money in, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. What if that's wrong? And I still think it's wrong. I think you do put your money in, but you have to watch closely for maybe stepping aside when the risk gets too great. But that's when it started for me, back in the late 90s, 2001 timeframe. That's when I first remember kind of questioning these things. And of course, the more I've read and the more I've been exposed to, the more I've learned about how these were major departures from our founding and things like that, which is part of the problem. All right, let's go to the next clip here.
Both of those two things that you just mentioned, I think, are kind of connected, where there is this thing about like desperately needed revisionism about the 20th century, particularly, and the two world wars. But there's something about, I think, for guys like in our camp, there was always something particularly infuriating about a guy like Mark Levin. And because Mark Levin particularly always, unlike other prominent war hawks and neoconservatives, Mark Levin really draped himself in the Constitution, and that was his thing, that he was the constitutionalist. And there is, now, I'm not exactly a constitutionalist. I'm more in the Rothbard camp. Like we, let's just say, like, we have a lot of dinners with constitutionalists, but that was never exactly our, brand of libertarianism. But it was just, to me, you can get into, these are arguments that are above my pay grade when people get into like technical constitutional arguments. Like if I was a fly on a wall and we were at dinner with like, I guess I could have been a person at this table if times had matched up. But like if Judge Napolitano and Anthony Scalia were like having a conversation about, I'm not the one to chime in there and say, well, actually, gentlemen, it's like this.
We would
there are
listen.
experts.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd be very interested to sit and listen, right?
Yeah.
But my whole thing is just, it was just so undeniable, is that the government that the Constitution authorizes bears zero resemblance to the government that we live under today. And if you're going to say that you're a constitutionalist, well, then every day you better be ranting against this entire monstrosity, none of which is authorized by the Constitution. And the Constitution, it's not as if the Constitution goes, well, look, we've expressly laid out these and delegated these powers to the federal government, but then there's also a lot of stuff that we don't talk about here, and that's all up for interpretation. Like, it's very clear. It's very clear in multiple places and then enshrined in the 10th Amendment that, like, hey, if we did not expressly give you this authority, you don't have it. It doesn't exist. It's maybe the states and mostly the people and so there is just like, in a sense, the reason why we need so much revisionism in the 20th century is because the whole story is a lie. The whole justification for this regime that we live under, which really people view the United States of America as, I guess, having started with in 1776 and that the ratifying the Declaration of Independence is what created this, that's just not at all. Like, so you're telling me there hasn't been a revolution here? Well, first of all, we initially set up the Articles of Confederation, right? Then that was cooed away into creating the constitutional system to begin with. But if you just say, Tom, before World War I, right? And even if we were going to, let's say up to Woodrow Wilson, and we'll even leave a little bit of the early progressive era in there, right? So like even after the expansions of the state that happened under Theodore Roosevelt, the government of that time just bears no resemblance to this system. There's just nothing at all. The amount that the government actually interacted with its citizenry, or how much you're talking about a time where there was no income tax and no central bank and there was no federal regulation. There was essentially no federal spending. The federal government basically didn't exist to most people. This is a radically libertarian society compared to the one we have now. And it's only literally in this time, as you could get from any decent Milton Friedman lecture, right? We went from 1865 to 1912 in this country that had no income tax, no central bank, no federal regulation, essentially no federal spending. And in this time, you saw the greatest rise in the living standard for the average person, like the greatest raise in the lot in life of the average guy. It made America the wealthiest country that's ever existed. And that living under that order is the only reason why we're even able to live in this order, right? Like, this was the story of the world wars, that we just outproduced everybody. There's like basically two things. We joined late and we outproduced. Hey, our submarines weren't as good as the German subs, but we could make 12 in the time that they could make one. We turned this product. And so essentially, we now live under this illegal, unauthorized regime where it's not an honorable system like the old one where we produced a lot of stuff because we had laissez-faire free markets. Now it's all top-down government authority, fiat, Wall Street speculating. And essentially, the revisionism, what it gets at is their whole narrative about why this whole new order is justified and why it wasn't a betrayal of the old order. It was just what we became. That really needs to be torn down because it's nonsense. It's not true. And it's not right, and it's led to just disaster for the.
Okay, I can't really improve on that at all. Dave really got what we're trying to talk about here. If you just accept what happened in the 20th century and you don't go back and look at any of it, like with a critical eye, and how it matches up to what was the intent of the original founding. And let me say one good thing about Mark Levin. He wrote a book called Men in Black, and I thought he did a pretty good job. It's kind of a revisionist work, right? He's looking at Supreme Court cases, and he's looking at these Supreme Court cases as like critical pivot points in American history that ultimately led to bad outcomes, led to an increase in government power, a reduction of individual liberty, things like that. So Men in Black is a really good book that actually gets at exactly what Dave is talking about. But the thing about it is I don't know, somehow we've devolved into Republican and Democrat, this whole sport, and we're just not really able to talk about it. I think it's by design, right? The people that run the Democratic Party, the people that run the Republican Party, they like this tit for tat arrangement where they don't really accomplish much, but they all stay in power and they make money and it works for them, right? But the reason it's not working for us is because if you think about it, anything that works for government, that makes government stronger, more powerful, the people have to become necessarily less powerful. I mean, this is the dynamic. And so all these things that people are trying to bring up to say, hey, this is where we erred. This is where we erred in the 20th century. These things need to be going, we need to go back and change them. And the challenge with all that, obviously, is it's just so entrenched now. Now there's just so much interest on all sides of these things. It's almost impossible to change. But it is the reason. It is the reason why we are where we are today. It is the reason why you don't feel like you can get ahead. It is the reason why your children will not have as good a life in America as you've had. There are reasons for this. These are assignable causes. And the reason I think this whole discussion is so important is because if we're just shouted down by the bullies out there like Mark Levin, if I was debating Mark Levin, I would say, Mark Levin, why are you bullying everybody on this? I mean, you wrote Men in Black. That was a revisionist look at the problems that, the hinge points that led to problems in America that you identified. Why can't you have some revisionist outlook around the wars in the Middle East? Why don't you see that the same way you see the activist Supreme Court? That would be my question for Mark Levin. But the thing is, they're hell-bent on just trying to shout down people. And people are trying to, look, there's people out there trying to begin conversations that will ultimately lead to a better America. But it's just the establishment and these people in the corporate media they're in the way of all that. And I don't know, I think Dave said it best there, and it's a big problem. And to me, it starts with, we all have to just recognize that if the Republicans stay in power, they're not going to make things better. If the Democrats get into power, they're not going to make things better. They're likely going to make things worse, right? Because of the dynamic that he talked about earlier. They're constantly trying to create, they're trying to perfect human beings and perfect the system in such a way that it's egalitarian. And that's just impossible. That's never going to happen. And then, of course, when the Republicans come back into power, they don't ever tear down what the Democrats created. That just becomes settled, and they move on to the next battle, right? But the conservatives are losing all the time in giving ground. And so we need to get out of that cycle. I think that's the message here, is to get out of that cycle and begin to see America through the lens of what it should be, okay, based on the founding, and how we've allowed our government to basically slide us every day. We're going closer and closer to some sort of socialism. America is going to cease to exist. It maybe already does cease to exist. I mean, that you could debate that, but certainly it's not going to get better. Going in this direction is not going to get better, as evidenced by the last 100 years, 125 years. And, people have got to start recognizing that the things they learned in 8th grade history and the things they're being told are just not true. And they're going to have to start questioning a lot more if we're going to turn this big old ship around. All right, with that, I'm going to go to wrap up. Thanks, everybody, for coming in and listening. Go to YouTube and subscribe the show if you would, and come back and listen. That's the most important thing. Come back and listen. We'll have another show for you on Who Gets to Decide. Look, I've been talking for an hour and a half today, but I think this is so important. I'd really like to. I saw this and I was like, man, these guys are right over the target. And go listen to these guys too. They're really, really good. I think you'll really enjoy it. Their shows are very entertaining as well. All right, everybody, I'm out. Thanks for coming in. Peace.